Hello, everybody, and welcome to Responsible AI in Action with the Responsible AI Institute, where we are speaking with some of the leading experts in AI. I'm very excited to have Rumman Chowdhury joining us today. Rumman, thanks so much for joining us.
Excited to be here, Patrick. Thank you.
I'm very excited for this conversation. Before we started recording, I had mentioned to you that you've been talking about AI for a while, as you well know. You were talking about AI before it was cool, and you have really been involved in a lot of initiatives with regards to talking about the importance of responsible AI. Of course, as of now, you're the co-founder and CEO of Humane Intelligence. So I would love to start there with our conversation, Ruman. What was the philosophy or the reasoning behind starting this nonprofit organization?
Well, last year I spent a lot of time on the outside of industry, actually for the very first time in my career within responsible AI. I started off at Accenture, I had a startup, I moved to Twitter. So last year was in a very interesting space where there wasn't really much that I saw in industry that I wanted to do. It was a really weird time in tech anyway with all the layoffs. So a lot of people were on the outside. And I really thought through what is the value I can bring as somebody who's had industry experience, who's a data scientist and somebody who's a builder in the space, but someone who's thought critically about it. There are a lot of really brilliant people, right, who work on policy, who work on raising awareness. So what I realized is that there are a couple of things missing in the current evolution of the responsible AI space. One is that there's an insufficient number of people who have the skills needed to critically assess algorithms from a technical perspective. And I knew this from my time at Twitter, et cetera. It was actually very hard to hire for my team, not because there are not enough practitioners in AI, but there are not enough practitioners in AI who have been taught to think about them critically. So that was number one. Number two was people often say, oh, it's because we don't have standards. I don't see what the standards are. It's a correct statement, but an incorrect assumption. We're actually drowning in standards. There's a lot of standards, lots of people, lots of feelings, lots of perspectives, lots of very well thought through papers, analyses, right? Some of them not so well thought through, right? But the point is the discoverability is very hard. Our community of responsible AI is and remains very insular. We know who the power players are. We know who the actors are. We know how to find each other. But I've been jokingly saying every week 100 new risk and compliance officers suddenly have a new role of implementing responsible AI governance. And the same arc happens over and over. They have to go out and discover our people. And it doesn't, there is no good place to do that. So Humane Intelligence is designed to do two things. First is create that community of discoverability around what exists. But second, do so in a way that people can interact with it, critically analyze it, and kind of put their hands into it to learn how to be smart about how to look at these things.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. You make a really good point about how fellow professionals within the responsible AI ecosystem are very familiar with each other, very familiar with the work, but there does need to be a lot more awareness outside that ecosystem. That resonates with me a lot. It's interesting too, because in addition to that, Forbes released an article this week that states that as new as AI seems, in a short time it will be commoditized and it will actually eventually fade from view, similar to smartphones and computers, where it will enhance our productivity, but the novelty of AI will wear off. And obviously, now those companies using AI or even just talking about using AI do have a competitive advantage. But these AI tools are already being used by many at a low or no cost. And it's going to be much more of a factor too of what companies do with the technology outside of just having it. And in this Forbes article, Nick Frost, who's a co-founder of Cohere, states, people don't sit around marveling at the internet or smartphones, but those technologies completely change how productive we are. AI will increasingly transform businesses without us even thinking about it. So, Ramon, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. How far off are we from AI being just another tool that is used in the background of our lives? Or do you see AI always taking center stage?
I think that in order for AI to be something we don't think about, it needs to stop being in center stage. And the only way we get it out of center stage is to resolve the issues of responsible use. We're reaching the upper limit of, not the upper limit, we have reached really high achievement goals in technological capability. We are still very early days, slash, not even remotely addressing the issues of like responsible implementation. And I don't say that as a nice to have. I say that as quite literally CEOs of companies and regular people will not use things that don't work. And if something isn't built responsibly, if it is not thinking through all the audiences that will be impacted by it, whether it's directly or indirectly, it is a product that doesn't work. As I mentioned earlier, I've spent most of my time in industry, and that's always how I've explained responsible AI, right? If I'm interacting with people whose job it is to build and sell products, and I'm trying to give them a value proposition for responsible AI, yes, everybody agrees that we need to build technology responsibly for the world. That actually often sounds like a very insurmountable task, or maybe a very subjective task that people maybe want to avoid, or it sounds like something that's not operationalizable. Good product development is operationalizable. At least it is something that we've known how to operationalize. So introducing or maybe reconfiguring in their brains that responsible AI is good product development means that we're going to get to that stage. Axios had an article a few weeks ago about how generative AI is in its trough of disillusionment. I actually agree with. And I'm quoted in that article by Ina Fried saying that generative AI will remain a party trick until we figure out how to implement it responsibly. I genuinely believe that. And again, for me, it is about the mission to society, but it is also literally about good product development.
Yeah, that's a really good point that right now, I think generative AI and other technologies in this space are very flashy. It's the sparkly new thing out there, but it's only going to be when we start to implement it responsibly and put standards in place for using this technology that we're going to be able to see it last in the long run and in my opinion, be an effective technology as well.
Completely agreed. And I was at the TED conference last week, and my TED talk actually advocates for a right to repair for artificial intelligence. And what I specifically say in that talk is that the current dynamic is very much where companies are saying, trust me. And actually, I end my talk by saying, I've been working in the field of responsible AI. And in that field, we often ask the question, what can tech companies build so that people will trust AI? And what I've realized is we're asking the wrong question. The question we should be asking is, what are the tools we can build so that people can make AI beneficial for themselves? So if we zoom out a minute and we think about like what algorithms are, right? And what artificial intelligence is, it's essentially a macro level pattern matching tool, right? So these are models that are very sophisticated that are able to take in a lot of different kinds of input and make a predictive output, right? And for those of us like myself who've been in statistics or I'll come to data science and AI from a stats and math background, that's not an unfamiliar world. Predictive analytics have existed for a very long time in less sophisticated methodology, but we're struggling with the same problems. Now, the fundamental thing to realize is that while in aggregate, human behavior is actually somewhat predictable. I'm not saying that we don't have free will, but just as a mass, human beings tend to behave in certain ways have actually been largely predictable for some time. The individual as an atomized being is actually incredibly difficult to predict, right? So what we struggle with when we talk about responsible AI often is that in aggregate, people will do something, but you specifically, will you do that thing? It is actually significantly more complex because the amount of data and information that we have about individuals is limited and should remain limited, but also that people do have free will. We do complicated things. We do things that are irrational. And it's very hard to predict an individual's behavior, even though as a mass human beings act a particular way. So why I advocate for something like a right to repair, there is no way, and we're already seeing this, there is no way for companies to understand everybody's values, everybody's perspectives, and make the tools that will be beneficial for everybody. So we see this struggle with things like everything from, an AI system that outputs racist output to the other end where we saw Gemini trying to make diversity, but in ways that were inappropriate, right? Because tackling every single potential question and issue, A, is impossible, but also B, I see this very dangerous rhetoric in the AI space lately of trying to capture values. Now, that makes me itchy. Like that makes my skin itchy for a couple of reasons. Number one is I worry very much when corporations are in the business of trying to embody values into technology by capturing people's values, number one. Number two, you can ask any social scientist and they will tell you, first of all, people don't always articulate their values. And number three, they hold inconsistent values. Their actions are not always representative of the values that they've said they have. Oh, number four, there's no such thing as universal values. There is literally no one code. You can name the most extreme value that you think we hold as a society, and I will point out examples in which we don't actually uphold it. So it is a losing task to even the most ethical and responsible company, let's say, is trying to be on this mission to make this AI that will be useful and beneficial to everybody by embodying, quote, values. It is literally impossible. The only way to do it is to give people ownership about how AI is used in their lives.
It's so important. It's so important to be able to keep that in mind. And you bring up a really important point about companies and this idea of values as well. It relates to this other article that I wanted to ask you about. AI Magazine came out with an article talking about the impact of generative AI on workers and companies. And there seems to be a disconnect between leaders and workers, according to a report by Accenture, which I know that you have previous experience at. In this report, they talk about how 60% of workers are concerned that generative AI may increase stress or burnout, but only 37% of leaders see this as an issue. And then when it comes to job security, 58% of workers are worried, yet less than one third of C-level executives feel that job displacement is a concern for the people. And then in addition to that, 95% of workers see value in working with generative AI, but their top concern is that they don't trust organizations to ensure positive outcomes for everybody. And I think this really relates a lot to what you were just speaking with regards to values. In your opinion, how can we level set trust when it comes to deploying generative AI? Is there a way that it can be used to enhance productivity or, as you were saying, values in the workplace without negatively affecting the well-being of others?
Oh, that's a tough question to answer. And I was going to say, I'll give you the short answer, which is no. And then I'll give you a longer answer, which again goes back to this sort of this right of repair idea, right? And I use the right to repair, which is actually that's an existing phenomenon. That's something that people have been advocating for, not with artificial intelligence, with other technologies. I think the example that I actually find the most interesting is the McDonald's self-serve the soft serve ice cream machines. There's actually an entire movement for the right to repair those machines because the narrative goes they're constantly broken and people know how to fix them, but it's illegal to fix them because the company says they need to send a technician and it just sometimes takes a very long time. But a less kind of humorous example that I give in my talk is farmers who bought John Deere tractors, and these tractors, so previously farmers would just, if their tractor broke, they'd fix it. They'd go to a mechanic, right? John Deere made it illegal to do that. So farmers actually learned to program and they worked with hackers, and this is technically illegal, hackers to hack into their own databases and mainframes in their tractors and fix it that way, rather than, having to wait for weeks for an authorized technician to show up. Now, to be clear, the reason they did that was not like impatience, but because in farming, timing is of the essence. If your crops are ready to harvest, you got to go harvest the crops. The crops aren't going to be like, oh, I guess your tractor's down. I guess I'll wait to ripen. Like it doesn't work that way. So if you need this equipment, timeliness matters. They can't wait for weeks. So it's literally costing them their livelihood. Now you talk about trust, right? So in a sense, like the company broke trust when they said that we're going to negatively impact your livelihood, right? And the thing is, as a company whose entire business model is to serve you, the customer, with this equipment, the fact that we're giving you equipment that would then ultimately lead to an adverse outcome for you because of the technology and the technological restrictions we put into it really like embodies, how this would work. So what I would say is the reason the answer is no is we have not figured out this paradigm by which the people actually using the technology, not the companies who were using the technology, have a way to go in, fix things, find problems. So I think it's really important as we jump into the next hype cycle of AI, which will be agentic AI. I think the more we keep ignoring this question and we keep punting it down the road, we punted it down the road with machine learning, we punted it down the road with narrow AI, we're punting it down the road with general purpose AI. I hope and I think that agentic AI will really be the tipping point, right? So what companies are going to try to sell us now are agents. So, to your question about the Accenture report, about people in the office being worried, of course they're going to be worried because now they're seeing a world in which companies are like, wow, we'll get to have a digital twin. If you're a CEO, you're thinking, great, this digital twin can sit on meetings for me, right? But if you're not the CEO of the company, you're like, great, they're just going to replace me with an AI version of myself, and I will have no rights and protections over my own intellectual property, my own physical being, right? And it's important. Like the issue here is not the technology, it's the institutions that are using the technology. So that nervousness is not because of this magical invention of AI. The nervousness is about us feeling like these institutions that have been built are not built to help us and protect us. One more point about that. The actors and writers strike should really be looked at a lot more as a leading indicator for what's going to happen. So what was really smart about what they did, and this is the thing, at first it was surprising to me, but then I realized, no, it makes sense that an industry of people who are not natively technologists were the first to say, actually, hold on, we're concerned because they're not enamored of the technology, right? Like we drink the Kool-Aid of AI. I think sometimes all of us, including the people who work in responsible AI, we're so steeped in AI. Our baseline assumption is that AI is going to do X, Y, and Z. How do we make sure we do it responsibly, right? But the starting half of that sentence was, it's going to do this stuff. Actors and writers sat there and thought, I don't do anything with AI. AI doesn't exist in my world. They're trying to shove this thing into my world that's not natural. It doesn't belong here. And it will do so at my expense. What was really smart about how they approached it is they didn't really see the technology as the problem. They realized the institutions were the problem. Their issues were with studios taking their likeness, right? Taking their words and using it to perpetuate what lives in their brain or their body or their image in a way that they were not comfortable with. So what they fought for was not a protection against artificial intelligence. It was a protection against the institutions misusing AI. So that, CEO worker thing, of course, if you're the CEO of a company, you're not worried about the company misusing AI. You're the one that's going to make the decisions. What we're seeing is people worried about their own empowerment in a world in which AI enables organizations and institutions to capture and own more of who they are.
Rumman, you have given us so much to think about as we close out this conversation today. You make some really good points that it isn't necessarily the technology, but it's more so our approach and organizations' approach and institutions' approaches to dealing with this technology and figuring out the best path forward. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to join us today. And I really appreciate your work in this space as well. Your perspective is so important and so needed as AI continues to advance and develop. So I'm so grateful that you're able to join us. Before we head out, I'm just wondering if you could share with our listeners where they could find out more information about you, Humane Intelligence, and all the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so my personal website is just my name, RummanChowdhury.com. The Humane Intelligence website is just humane-intelligence.org. And then we're also on LinkedIn as Humane Intelligence, one word.
Great. Well, I'll make sure to include those various resources in our show description. So, viewers out there, all you have to do is scroll down. Highly recommend checking out all of these resources provided. Vermont, thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.